So I was born in England, lived there around 23 years, but now I'm living in Sweden in the cold. And one of the questions people often ask me is, well, how did you go from England, from a town, to living in Sweden on a farm in the fields? How did you end up here? And there are two versions of the story, and there is a short version and a long version. I often take the short version because people don't really have time to listen to the long version, and because version 2 I would rather share one-to-one and take it slowly. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you version 2 of why and how I ended up in Sweden. So around about 10 years to this date, now we're in December, around about 10 years ago, my life switched. Something happened, something shifted, which brought me here. Now, go back 3 months prior to that, now we're in 2012. And my mind is going through a shift right now, and I'm thinking it's time for something new. It's time for a new mission in life. And this mission included me leaving England. And I'm going through a process, and I'm thinking to myself, I think it's time for me to leave England. And so what do? I've got no contacts. I know no one in any other country. I don't know what country, I have no idea. So I just start to pray. I'm like, God, I feel it's time for something new. I feel it's time to go to another country. So I start to pray, and I pray a very specific prayer. This is honest, this is true. I prayed for 3 specific things, and I'm going to share these exact specific things that I prayed for. And I prayed for around about 3 months, from about October through to December 2012. And the first thing I prayed for was for God to send me to another country. I honestly felt like it was time to go to another country. I don't know why, I just felt it. And so I prayed. I said, God, send me to another country. But I don't have a clue which country. I don't know. You choose the country, just send me to another country. I want to be in another country. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that God would give me someone to go with. So I prayed, God, I want to go to another country, but give me someone to go with me that knows the language, that knows the culture, that can help me out, that can support me. So send me to another country, but give me someone else to go with me. That was number 2. Number 3 was that God would do all this within 1 year. So within 1 year, God, I want to be in another country. You choose it, but give me someone else. You choose a person, but let me be there with that person within 1 year. So that was the prayer that I prayed for around about 3 months, 2012. We come to December 2012 now, and I and another girl start to talk online, and we start to get to know each other, and we're speaking to each other. And I don't know this girl, I've never seen this girl before, but we start talking, we start sharing, and eventually we decide to meet up. So me and this girl, we meet up. She lived on the other side of London, so it was around about a 3-hour journey. And when I met this girl, there was something different about this girl. Something different from all the other girls. And I couldn't explain what it was, but there was something that just clicked. Something that just made me feel like something is different. This is unique. This whole situation. And I'm not just talking about love. I'm talking about just life in general, it just felt so different with this person. Now, I am very careful when it comes to relationships. I've always been careful. This was something that my friends laughed at me for in school. They laughed at me because I didn't want to have a girlfriend, because I was set in my mind, I'm going to wait for the right girl. Wait for the right girl before I enter a relationship. I want to get married to the right girl. I'm waiting, yeah? So I was very peculiar with girls. I didn't enter into any relationship without knowing this is the one. So I don't play around with relationships. I know this. But this was different, and things just went so fast, and I didn't even catch up to what was going on. Very quickly after meeting each other, we entered into a relationship. We became boyfriend and girlfriend, and things were moving so fast. And at that time, I'm just thinking, well, this girl, she lives on the other side of London. We can work out, living arrangements later, but it's not a big deal. It's a 3-hour journey between us. I'm not thinking too much about living arrangements right now. I find out that her family live in Sweden, and this didn't hit me at the start. I don't know if I had information to this, but I never thought of it. I'm just thinking, she lives in England, I live in England, she speaks English, I speak English, and we're boyfriend and girlfriend. She tells me that her family live in Sweden, and I find out that she is actually not planning on living in England for the rest of her life. She tells me that she's gonna move back to her home country. This was around between about March to May the next year, 2013. She says, Albie, I'm gonna go back to Sweden. That's my plan. I'm only here for 1 year to work, and then I'm gonna go back. And I'm like, you're gonna go back? Back to Sweden? What about you and me? What about us? And how's it gonna work? It's gonna be a bit weird if, we have a relationship and we're on different parts, of the world almost, it felt like. And I'm like, what is going on right now? She asks me a question. She says, well, you can come with me. And I'm like, come with you? To Sweden? I live in England. This is all I know. England. Move to Sweden with you? We're not even married. I don't even know if we're gonna get married. And we had a conversation about this, and I went home confused. And I'm like, God, I don't get it. I am so careful when it comes to relationships. I don't get this. Like, now it seems like it's game over. She's going back to Sweden. That's it. What am I gonna do? And I'm praying. And the thought drops into me. What came to me was this. Albie, this is exactly what you prayed for. And I remember that moment. I was like, you're right. You're right. I prayed. 1 second, I prayed. Did I not pray for this? Did I not pray that someone would take me to another country? And now I'm being asked to move to another country. I started to scratch my head, and I began to think about this more seriously. And I began to plan. I didn't tell my parents at first, but I began to plan. I began to sell my stuff. I had bikes. I had about, 4, 5, 6 bikes. that I loved. I began to sell my stuff, sell my bikes. I had my own business that I was starting up. I was making furniture. I had machines. I began to sell my machines. This was scary, but at the same time, I'm like, this cannot be a coincidence. So I began to sell my stuff to the point where I just had a few things left, plus clothes. So it came to the day when I would leave. And it was one of the saddest days of my life, because at that time it was a huge step of faith. And my family didn't really understand, and I guess I didn't really understand either. But I left with a suitcase of clothes, and I said I'll try out 1 year. I'll go for 1 year. I land in Sweden. I land here. This is where I live, yeah? I land here in September 2013. Now watch this. Watch this. I prayed 2012, around about October 2012. Send me to another country with someone else within 1 year. October around to September the next year. I was here in Sweden in less than a year, just under a year. Now, what are the chances of that? Of praying a prayer, God, send me to another country with someone else within 1 year, and it all happened specifically. It just happened. It just flowed. When I prayed that prayer, I was saying, God, I want to go to another country, but also to share my faith. I want to share my faith with people that are speaking another language. That's what I want to do. The first thing I done when I came to this village, the very first thing I remember going into the village, I went into the church. The very first thing I stepped into the church, I was asked to be a secret guest at a youth club. And there I get to share who I am and what I believe in to these kids that don't know much about God. And I shared my faith the very first time I stepped into the church here in this village. Now, even though all of this happened and I saw that God was doing something, the first year here was so difficult. It was so difficult. I didn't know the language. I didn't understand. I didn't get the culture. I didn't fit in. I just, what am I doing here? I'm just eating someone else's food and just taking their money. I felt useless. And I'm going back and forth, and me and my wife-to-be at that time, we're going back and forth. Do I stay here? Do I go? What do we do? It's just, it was so difficult. And I'm just asking myself and God, like, have I made a mistake? Did I do wrong? I don't know. God, you got to help me. Now, the truth is, when I prayed that prayer back in 2012, God sent me to another country. In my mind, I know what I was thinking. I didn't say it, but I know what I was thinking. I was thinking that God would send me to one of the most secular or ungodly countries there is. I don't want to go to a country where there's loads of Christians and I just fit in great. I wanted to go somewhere where people don't really get faith. They don't get God. They don't get why they need God. That's where I want to be, where people don't really hear much about God. Send me to that country. Send me to the most atheist country, the most secular country. That's what was on my mind, really. And it was just so interesting because that first year, my wife-to-be, she sends me a YouTube clip. I don't remember the title of the YouTube clip, but she sends me a YouTube clip, and it was something like top 10 most atheist countries or top 10 most secular countries. Something like that. Basically, the top countries that don't want to hear about God, right? And when she sent that, I'm like, yes, good. This is it. This is it. Now I know what country to go to. I'm going to go to the country that is number one, that is the most secular, the most ungodly country. That's where I want to go, God. Because I was so unsure at that time. And so I'm watching it and I'm rubbing my hands. I'm like, yes, come on, finally, I'm going to go to the country. And it's going down 10, 9, 8, 7. And I'm ready to pack my bags. And I'm like, when it comes to number one, that's the country. I'm packing my bags and I'm out of Sweden. It gets to number one and my mouth drops. And I'm like, no way. Do you know what country it was? Sweden. Right where I am. And right there and then, I just knew it. God's answered my prayers and He's taken me exactly where I wanted to be. This is where I wanted to be. This is why, for me, no critic can tell me that God is not real. I know God's real, not because I just read a book. It's because God, He answers prayers so specifically. He has done it time and time again. And when God keeps answering specific prayers, you can't deny it. You just can't. And so my hope was to be able to share my faith here in this country. And I never knew that I would end up learning another language. Like if someone had told me 10 years ago I would learn another language and speak to them in their language, I don't know what I would have said. But my time here, I've been able to learn the language and speak and to share my faith to people. And we've had meetings, and there was one specific meeting that we had, and it was here in this village, and there was a lot of young people there. And I spoke, I shared my faith, and afterwards there was time where people could just hang out or stay if they wanted to talk or even to pray. And my wife, she saw someone there that looked quite upset, and she goes to this person and asks the person, "What's up? What's the matter?" And the person begins to share about their grandmother. Their grandmother wasn't that well. Been in bed for a long time and just can't move and just lifeless almost. So my wife now, she prays for this grandmother. She doesn't know the grandmother. The grandmother doesn't know that my wife is praying for her. They're on two different, places in the village. And my wife prays a prayer in faith. Then after that, they go their separate ways. It's around about a year later, I end up talking to the same person that my wife was praying with. And it just so happens we are talking about life, and we come into religion and God and why Christianity is different to the other religions. And in the middle of that conversation, the person just switches the conversation, changes up the subject and says, "You know what? You never guess what." I said, "What?" The person said, "I remember being at one of your meetings and your wife prayed for my grandmother. She prayed for my grandmother. My grandmother was just on the bed, couldn't move, and I was upset. And so your wife prayed for her." Do you know what happened the next day? I'm like, "What? What happened?" The next day, my grandmother gets out of bed and starts walking around. We go to the shops. She's like, "Let's go to the shops." They go to the shops and the grandmother is just walking around and shopping as if it's normal. And the person's telling me this was just crazy because the days before she's been lying down in bed, just not doing anything. And then the next day she's up and she's moving. How is that possible? And I'm like, that's it. This is the difference. This is the difference. Our God is alive. He is alive. It's not just empty prayers. It's not just a book with words. It is alive. He is alive. And so when you are praying prayers and God is answering specifically, what are the chances of that? Just put it into mathematics. What are the chances of that? You have someone praying for another person. Yeah, the grandmother didn't even know my wife was praying for her. They weren't in the same place. The grandmother wasn't moving. My wife prays. The next day, the grandmother receives strength. Oh, what are the chances of that happening? And when you see these things happening again and again, so specific, we just know God is alive. And this is why it doesn't matter to me if people laugh at me. People laugh at, oh, you've got YouTube videos about God and God's not real. Look, I know God's real. I just know it, yeah? Not just because I read a book, but because he answers prayers so specifically. And when you pray a prayer, not just once, but again and again and again, and you see answers, you have so many stories, so many testimonies. It doesn't matter what anybody says, because someone can say God's not real, but when you have God answer your prayers again and again, it does something to you. And so that is my version 2 of how and why I came to Sweden. It began with a prayer to God, and God just allowed things to happen, and now I'm here. 10 years later, I can speak English and Swedish. I'm living here, and it doesn't mean life is always easy just because you're a Christian. Life is hard. Life is hard. Life has been very hard for me. But the big difference is, the big difference is that I know that I'm not alone. I've seen it in past. I've seen it, all through my life, that God is there and he's listening. And why is he listening? Because I have faith. I have faith in him. And I don't know who will watch this, but if you want to experience God, if you want to know if he's real, well then you have to exercise faith. You have to believe in something, even though you can't see him. You believe. That doesn't mean you have perfect faith. It means, God, I see creation, I see everything, I see the wonderful, beautiful things you've made. There must be more. And you seek and you search. And the Bible says, if you seek after him, you will find him. If you search, if you knock, if you keep on knocking, keep on praying, he will answer. And that's not something that I say. That's something that God himself says.